Joining us right now is one of the people in charge of watching this development. LeFrak Chairman and CEO Richard LeFrak is joining us right now. Richard, good to see you.
Hi, Maria.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, by the way, congratulations. You are an infrastructure guy. The president knows that. You know Donald Trump for a long time.
Yes, we've been friends for many, many, many years.
So how did this come about? Have you spoken to him in the past about some of the deficiencies in this country in terms of what we need to do?
Well, I think he's aware of the fact that myself and the other gentlemen on this little unofficial advisory council of his are people, first of all, that are familiar with building and also know how to get things done. So I think the idea was we have a broken process. The infrastructure process in the United States is an underfunded situation. It's done in a very, let's say, slow regulatory manner, which is costing a lot of money. And he asked if we would look into it to see if there's better ways to go about it.
Now, I don't think you can get two better titans, you and Steve Ross, in terms of looking at real estate and infrastructure in America today. So Steve Roth, rather.
Right, Steve Roth. Yeah, no, I think we both are very enthusiastic about doing this for our country and doing it for our president.
So let's talk about why things have gotten as dilapidated as they have. Is it largely a regulatory situation? I mean, there are so many laws and bureaucracies that it's hard to get things to the finish line?
Well, I think you have to start off with the funding and what we've been investing in our national infrastructure. The number that's basically accepted for a fair amount of money invested in this is about 3% of the GDP, and we've been underinvesting for about 20 years. So the country just hasn't been spending the money that has to spend in order to maintain the infrastructure, improve the infrastructure, and it's a kind of a tragic thing right now.
It really is, because it impacts people. You feel it. You just drive around and you see.
Well, it's not only congestion, which, you know, everybody is aware of, but it's broken water mains, it's airports that are, you know, under capacity.
Yeah.
It's the fact that we have no broadband in rural areas. You know, infrastructure represents a lot of things, not just roads, bridges, and tunnels. That's you know, that's just a small part of it, an important part of it, but a small part of it.
You had a meeting last week with the president regarding this issue, and a lot of people are wondering how the president is going to carry out so many of his important priorities. I mean, he's doing repeal and replace Obamacare right now. That's supposed to be followed by tax reform, supposed to be followed by infrastructure later in the year. And he's spoken about so-called private-public partnerships. Can you talk to us about how that works? What are you looking for in terms of how you pay for this, in terms of these private partnerships?
Well, in the end, first, everybody has to understand that about 70% of the money that's invested in infrastructure in the country comes from state and local governments, not from the federal government. So in order to get increased investment in this area, there has to be some sort of revenue, whether it's tax revenue from a local or state entity, or it's tolls, taxes. There's got to be some funding for it, and the majority of that comes from local governments or state governments. The public-private partnership is a relatively new phenomena here, but it's been in use overseas in Australia, in Canada, in Europe for quite a bit longer. And the purpose of having these things is not only to gain capital from private sources, but also to provide the discipline that private capital comes with. So the cost overruns, maintenance, on time, on budget, all private capital must take that risk. So basically, the private capital will put up the equity. There's got to be a revenue source, whether it's a toll or a tax in some manner, and that's what's going to pay the private capital back. But they take the risk on time, on budget, and if the project makes sense.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, a private investor needs to know that they could actually make some money on this if they're going to actually take that risk.
So countries like Canada, Australia, Germany that use these models take into account, even though the cost of capital may be a little higher, the fact that the discipline that's brought by the private sector into the process is well worth it.
What's your sense of how the banks participate here? I mean, are all the banks now trying to get in there in terms of creating vehicles to do that?
Well, I think there's huge amounts of capital all over the world for this. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious between pension funds in the United States, foreign sovereign funds all over the world, and generally there's plenty of private capital here, and the banks can harness that if they get into it. But I think the critical thing is, where is the revenue source going to come from to service the capital? One of the things that we discussed was a big no-no in Washington, and it's raising the gasoline tax, because the gasoline tax has not been raised since 1993.
Yeah, it seems like that's a good place for revenue.
And even if you just adjusted it for inflation, it would provide billions and billions of dollars more than it's being provided now. But it's a little bit the third rail of politics for Congress, because they've been reluctant to do it. If you think about it for a minute, in 1993, your car got 15 miles to the gallon. Today, your cars are getting 30 miles to the gallon, and the gasoline tax hasn't changed. So really, you're probably paying 30 or 40% in real terms of what you were paying for use of the roads in the last 25 years. So
you would sort of veer toward, yeah, we should rethink about this gasoline tax.
Well, I don't want to make political decisions for...
Right, of course.
And I don't think that's what we're thinking about. I think we want to offer a bunch of options for the president and for Congress, and let them see what's most palatable to them. But in the end, this doesn't come for free. Somebody has to pay for it.
And do you think it will be $1 trillion?
Well, again, yes, it may be $2 trillion, but it's not going to be spent over a year or 2 years. They're talking about increasing the funds about $100 billion a year. And if you think about the math, that means you have to have a sustainable revenue of about $5 or $6 billion in order to support $100 billion worth of debt. So the numbers are big, but they're not, when you break it down over time, it's doable. It's doable.